Welcome to the SuperStar Communicator Podcast. Our aim is to ensure you speak and communicate with confidence, clarity, credibility, and impact, so that you present the best version of yourself in all business conversations. Welcome to our host, Susan Heaton-Wright.
Hello, everybody. This is Susan Heaton-Wright and Nick Simon from the SuperStar Communicator Podcast. We're doing a live stream today. As you know, SuperStar Communicator is all about empowering emerging leaders to make more impact when they have business conversations. And conversations is not exclusively about what you say. It's also about listening. And we are absolutely delighted to have someone here on the other end of the line from Puerto Rico. It's 5 o'clock in the morning, everyone, who is an absolute expert on listening skills. And this is Raquel Ark.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Let me tell you some things about her. Raquel Ark, MACPC, is a podcast host, speaker, mentor, coach, and trainer. She has over 25 years of experience in multinational corporations and academia, and currently spending most of her time in tech, which is always very interesting. She's the founder of Listening Alchemy, a communication training and coaching organization, including foundational evidence-based listening and communication programs. She's a podcast host for the Listening Superpower podcast, focused mainly on listening in teams and organizations for more effective communication. She has spoken on the TEDx stage, something that I was very proud that you did that. Raquel is currently the president of the International Listening Association. She's a Puerto Rican American living in Germany. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. And so I hope my voice is okay because it's pretty early in the morning here.
Well, I'm so grateful that you've taken the time to get up so early for us. Really, really appreciative. So, tell us about listening, because so often when we're thinking about communication, it's all about what I'm going to say and how can I influence people. But listening, people seem to ignore that side.
That's because it's so quiet. It's so quiet. You don't hear it like you do with speaking. And so we often forget that it's there. But it is if you start paying attention, it is the quiet superpower that really influences so much. I mean, think about somebody who does not listen to you, and a moment where you felt you weren't listened to, and you probably feel it in your stomach, and you probably turn that person off. And even if that person is talking in front of you, you're not there, right? So if you flip it and you really listen to someone and feel and connect with them wherever they're at, and it doesn't mean that you're agreeing, it doesn't mean that there's harmony in the room, but it means that you're really interested in that person without judgment, trying to understand their perspective, whether you agree or not, and you believe that this listening or this situation has potential, or you believe in it, or believe in that person. And if you can do that type of listening, it's great. And everybody leaves there energized, no matter what the outcome is usually.
But surely we're in a world where there's so much going on. We're getting so much information. Mm-hmm. How can we spend that moment really listening?
So here's the thing. I mean, we've talked about this before. First of all, when you're speaking, which then you got to go to Susan, how do you speak in a way that makes it easy for people to listen to? Because sometimes we complain, oh, they're not listening to me. But we don't always make it easy for people to listen. We're rambling all over the place, or our thoughts are not very structured, or it's just too much, or whatever. Or you're not paying attention to what that person needs in front of you because you only are thinking about what you want to say. So, but let's say we shift over to the listening piece. I've spent, when I first started getting into this listening piece, I had a listening class many, many years ago in university. I don't think there were that many back then. And we just listened to recordings and then answered questionnaires after. So it was purely on, what we took in, retention and writing back. But that is not listening in my mind anymore, or active listening. How do you paraphrase something back? So you're just thinking about what they say, you repeat it back. But actually, sometimes that gets in the way of listening, because you're thinking, okay, what did they say? And then you've missed out on so much that's there. So what I find very helpful is if you can be in your full body, like really from your tip of your toes to the top of your head to the tip of your fingers, and you're really in your whole self, then you know that you're present. And if you are aware of your breathing, you know that you're present. And you're really focused on the person, and it's not leaning forward and making eye contact. It's more about leaning back and taking in the perspective. I'm here in Puerto Rico, and I saw the sunset last night. And so to me, listening is like watching the sunset. The sun is there. You can't look directly at it because you'll hurt your eyes. But as it's going down, all the colors are changing. You see the colors on the water, it's rippling, and you're taking this whole thing, you're glancing at the sun every so often. And at the very end, if you're not really paying attention, there's a green flash. You could miss it. So you have to be really in tune, but leaning back. And all of a sudden, when this green flash happens, something clear, oh, that's the decision, oh, that's what matters, whatever. This flash, that's the type of listening that we're talking about. And it's more taking everything in and noticing things changing, what's happening in the fine tuning of the colors. And then that type of listening, that full, I say body, full experience listening, is the one that's really powerful. So what does that mean when I'm talking to people in tech who are engineers?
Yes.
That means that, in that moment, I've cleared my mind as much as possible. There's usually little bits that pop in or little thoughts, but it might be more, you realize what's important thoughts, not what do I want to say thoughts. And just waiting until they pause and then asking if there's anything else, or every so often just reflecting back what I understood that was important to them, not what's important to me, what's important to them. And that helps them to hear themselves. And then we get on the same wavelength in the conversation. And then all of a sudden that conversation takes a direction where we're not stuck in a hamster wheel. We're going from point A to point B to point C. So in those situations with coaching, it doesn't always matter that I understand for myself. What matters is that I find clarity that help them to understand themselves in that moment. But this is also important when you're a leader of teams, because we always think that we have to say something or give solutions all the time, the solution thing. But sometimes jumping into solutions too quick gets us in trouble. To actually take a moment and listen in the same way to the different perspectives to understand. And it doesn't take as much time as you think when you're doing it well. It actually is very quick. People are surprised what they understand of someone in just 2 to 3 minutes in the exercises. But you're doing it well. You're not thinking about other things. You're not distracted. And so when you do it well, it's amazing what can happen and what you understand. And a lot of times it goes beyond what the person has said. It's if you noticed what they're really yearning for, what they really want more than what they say, or you notice where there seems to be themes that keep coming up over and over, or you notice where there's questions or unanswered things or things that haven't been said, and then tap into that. That's where the good stuff is. And it really helps relieve the air in the space and give energy in a way that inspires people, excites people, or at least gives relief to people. So that their heads are clear, they can think clearly. they understand different perspectives. They're able to make different decisions. I can give an example if you'd like.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah. So the other day I was having a conversation with someone who's the director of product. This is in tech. And this person has, I think, a team around 40 people. You know, obviously he has some direct reports that manage this, but it's a fairly big team that was just put together. You know, things move fast in that world. You don't have much time, and you have a lot of goals. You have to reach your goals. And so there was a lot of discussions and a lot of energy being taken in discussions with meetings with stakeholders. So we started paying attention to this, and he realized, he's like, oh, wait a second. I don't think I'm not sure if they understand the context, or if I'm understanding the context of the situation first before we're trying to have these discussions about solutions. So he took extra time in the beginning, making sure, you know, they were speaking and listening and understanding his stakeholder. What does his stakeholder need? Getting the context ready, and then aligning that and talking to them and listening and really getting that straight. Wrote it down so that everybody was on the same page, right? And then they had their meetings. So they did that on paper beforehand, like a listening. Even you can listen with writing too, just so you know. And then they went into the discussions, and he said it was so quick because I took a few extra hours here, but I saved myself about 8 hours here of discussions. And not only that, a few weeks later, when they had their alignment meetings, he said, there was nobody challenging me. I don't know what happened. I'm a little bit worried. He was really worried that nobody was challenging him, to the point where he was thinking something was wrong. And I thought, okay, maybe you're just not being challenged because of these misunderstandings. Perhaps you can ask them to be challenged, or you can get challenged in other ways, you know. But that was one thing where he saved a lot of time after. But he's someone that's paying attention to that. You have to pay attention, because often we don't notice that power or what happens or the effect, because we forget to listen. We forget to listen to what happens to the listening.
Nick, do you have any questions?
Yeah. Yeah. What would surprise listeners about listening?
What would surprise listeners about listening? That it's so hard. That's what I hear. You know, everybody's coming like, yeah, I'm a pretty good listener. And then afterwards, oh, I'm not as good as I thought I was. So I think people are surprised that it's harder and that it just doesn't happen. That's one thing. I think when people start thinking about the people who listen to them and the effect it has on them, they're not surprised about the power of it once they start reflecting on that. Maybe it gets bigger than what they thought of. But what surprised me, and I'm not sure if this has surprised listeners as much, but what surprised me, I always thought of listening as I'm listening to get information to do my job better. So I'm listening to you for me. This is probably why you're listening to me right now, because you're trying to understand how to be a better listener, or how it helps you to speak better, because it does if you understand your audience. But what I know now is, if I listen to you, then you can think better and work better. So if I listen to you, this is important for leaders. If I listen to my team, they are able to think more clearly. They're able to relax, and we're not in this fear-based, time pressure-based, where we're just trying to do the discussions. But if you listen to someone well, you'll notice that instead of persuading you, all of a sudden they start thinking. This is good that they're thinking. We need more people to think. They start thinking, and then they start expressing themselves. And when they're expressing themselves, this means that their nervous system is calm and they're able to think more clearly. They actually listen to themselves. They're moving from the sympathetic system to the parasympathetic system. When this happens, then they're able to actually get more complex thinking. Instead of thinking, this is bad, my boss is bad, they're thinking, well, sometimes my boss does this and that's not good, but other times my boss does this and has helped me. This is more complex thinking. And then what happens, they're able to see other perspectives, and they become less extreme in their in what they think, because they're able to have that complex thinking. And so we often have these competitive thoughts in our mind, but we don't hear it. And when that happens, then actually that person starts changing themselves, and they may come up with the idea. Or then they're in a place where their brain is able to take in your thoughts or your ideas, where beforehand it was blocked. So this is really important. So I didn't realize, when you're in discussions and it's like going back and forth, that actually the best thing to do is not to get louder, but to start asking questions and listening with interest, not faking it, with interest. Kind of neutralize yourself as if you're a different person, if this helps you, and listen in that way, get curious, and that will shift the dynamics and help everybody in the room work better.
Jo contacted me. She can't be on this call today because of a meeting, but she said that she's read Radical Candor. A lot of people have read that book, and there is one section on noisy and quiet listening. For those people that haven't read the book, noisy listening is that, as a manager, you are butting in and challenging all the way through the other person listening. And then quiet listening is when you do not show anything in your face, any emotion, just like that. And you're challenging the other person to come up with more thoughts and more solutions. What is your thought about that style, or those styles of listening?
No matter what you do on the outside, it may be that they're not listening in either situation. I've actually, once people have experienced some of the listening workshops I've done, I've had people actually, Radical Candor is good, but they're like, I need to get listening, make sure the listening's happening in this, or else it doesn't work.
That's my thought.
So I've heard that before from people, also in organizations where they're really doing that, because people can take that, when they take it to the point of extreme where they're really not listening, then they're actually doing the opposite. So if you're asking questions and you're not listening, like really listening and interested, you will have the opposite effect. So imagine someone who asked you a question and said, what other ideas do you have? And then you can tell they're not present. What do? You stop talking, right? You're like, well, they're not listening anyway. Or they say something that has nothing to do with what you just said. And you're like, what? Or you said it, and then they say it again, and you're like, what just happened here? So no matter what your face is, what's really important when you're doing that, I mean, it's okay to be a neutral face, but just don't have a stern face, like this is because the brain's like thinking threat, I'm scared, so have a pleasant face, maybe a little bit of a smile, because you don't want to be a threat to that brain, or the brain's not going to think clearly, but you don't have to be overly interrupting. But just be present, be interested, and really believe in that person, believe that listening can help, that your listening will help that situation and help not only them think clearly, but you might change too, because you'll be listening to something and you may change your mind. So you have to be willing to change. If you're thinking, that's
really, really interesting. And Nick and I will know from auditioning that, well, I'm sure that people are much warmer now, but certainly old school classical music training was, you had the audition panel and they'd all have stern voices, stern faces, and it was really off-putting.
Because then you're thinking, what are they thinking? What are they doing? And then you can't even think
Are they
clearly.
listening? Have they already made up their mind? All of those things, rather than, as you say, it being a two-way musical conversation in that instance.
Yeah. And actually, it's a very creative process between people, in that process. And actually, what the research is showing, that the listening that has, so you have good listening, I think it's moderate listening, and this is the listening where you're listening and nodding your head, encouraging every so often, so you're not interrupting. You might ask a question every so often. That has powerful effect on people, a powerful effect on people. People will trust you more. They'll be more satisfied with their job. They'll think more clearly. This is great. But if you want to take it to the next level, then your listening is asking questions that help that person think further. You can even challenge the person, but when you challenge, you're still interested and curious, and you're not challenging just to challenge, but you're challenging and it's connected to what they just said or where you're taking things. So it's not your idea, your thoughts, and where you want to take things, but you're following them and where they want to go. With students I teach at the university, I have them do stakeholder interviews with people. They find someone that they don't know very well, that in a profession, they're always nervous, in a profession where they're curious about. And they put together 3 or 5 questions, not more, open questions. And I say to ask the first one, and then just follow the person and be interested. And it could be other questions come up that are not on your list. Don't worry about your list. If you guys run out of things to say, you can always go back to your list. And often they never get to their other questions. So you're following that person. And that type of listening is very powerful.
Great. And following on from that, one of my favorite TV writers, Vince Gilligan, who wrote Breaking Bad, explained that in his process for writing and with the writer's room, he would always pose his own ideas and let the writers kind of give their own say, no matter how good or bad their opinion is. And he was saying how he didn't like, wasn't always happy with the outcome, but knew that their opinions worked and were like very important when it came to writing the scripts. So how can you keep a kind of discipline of listening despite your kind of own creative ideas and vision, especially in a kind of position of leadership?
Ooh, that's great. I think there's lots of layers here. And you're talking from a leadership position, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Or I guess
First,
so it's in a creative kind of vision position, but mainly a leadership position. Yeah.
I mean, I think all leaders actually, if you're a leader, you're probably more creative versus a manager trying to control things, right? So, first, as a leader, like with him, he's very clear with his intention. So he has clarity on his own stuff, and then he's letting it go and going into a situation and letting the creative process happen in the space. So a lot of leaders may not be fully clear with their process, their intention, their thoughts, their assumptions, their biases. So as a leader, if you can take time to get clear about your own thoughts, what you really want to get out of this session, what your intention is for the group in that space, in that moment, in that meeting. For him, it was letting all ideas come out in that moment, no matter what. Then that's really important. Sometimes I find that if people are trying to listen and brainstorm and come up with solutions all at the same time, those are actually firing different areas in the brain. And that's why things get confused and everybody's in a different place. So even separating those, the discipline of separating, okay, this is a brain, this is just a listening. I'm just going to understand first. The second one might be brainstorming. The third one might, okay, now that we have this, then we do this. So separate those. Then you can be more intentional and allow that process. And with the creative process, also with decision making in business, I've come to believe that, we need time to think. You have these ideas and then to take a break, step back, come back again. Like we try to do it all at once. So if you actually have a little bit shorter time periods where you do one thing at a time and give people time to think, even if it's a lunch break or the next day or a 5-minute break to go to the bathroom, whatever, that helps things to settle and I think that helps the process go on. So it's not only discipline of listening, but discipline of process and the structure and the system that you've placed around to allow listening happen. Also in structures like listening circles, where You go in the same order, and it's one person at a time, and a person can pass. They do not have to speak, but you go in the same order, no matter what, whether it's a question, whether it's a thought, whether it's whatever. If you go in the same order, and you keep going until there's nothing left to be said or the time is up, this structure helps that introverts or people who are quieter will feel more comfortable speaking out because they don't have to, but they still want to be asked. And they know when they'll get their turn. And for people who talk and dominate, they tend to relax more because they know when they're always figuring out when they're going to jump in, but they don't have to. And they'll know when they can speak. And they actually listen better, and they usually speak less. The first round, people say what they typically say. And then once the next rounds come, that's where the stuff that's usually not said, or the creative process, so you start noticing that this creative process starts happening, and they start influencing each other because they don't have to say anything relating to what the last person said, but they can. So there's choice in that. That's one thing. In discipline, what's really important, and what the research is showing now, and we're just learning a lot of the research, is that the listening is episodic. What does that mean? That's a science term. That means that listening happens in moments. Listening is not continuous. It's a moment in time. The moment could be 1 minute. The moment could be 5 minutes. The moment could be a half an hour before your mind wanders or whatever. So if you think of listening in moments, that you cannot listen continuously all the time, then recognize, here's a really good moment. Just make that moment work. And if your mind wanders, come back and say, oh, sorry, I got distracted by this. Give me a moment. What did you just say? And bring yourself back. Or you might time the moments for, so that people are brainstorming, listening to each other this way, and then solutions or this way. You brainstorm, or you create these moments of listening. I think that really makes a difference. That's a discipline also, to notice that. And the third thing that comes to my mind right now is pay attention to when you're listening at your best. Everybody listens. Everybody can listen well. Everybody can listen poorly. And it depends on who. It might be who you listen to. Some people you listen well to, and some that you don't. It might be the conditions, like if you're tired or stressed, or you don't give yourself enough buffer between meetings to shift. It could be the structure, how you structure the meeting so that voices can be heard. It could be, if you're a leader, you start talking first, but maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should have them talk first because you're a person of power and you're taking voice away by speaking first. So notice the conditions where listening happens at its best for you, and try to recreate those conditions as much as possible. And so you have to do a lot of self-listening to notice when is it working and when is it not, or getting feedback. And then do that and try to create those conditions as best as possible. That's a discipline.
That's brilliant. Now, it's been absolutely fascinating. Before we go, do you have 3 top tips to share with the audience? And then, Nick, I know you have a question.
One of the things is allow yourself to fail. Allow yourself to fail and start over. Maybe that's the best. As you start to pay attention to this, you'll notice that it's harder than what you realize. It's a muscle that needs to be built. Challenge yourself to listen in different ways than you normally do. If you're listening, like I've had people say, well, I thought that I'm listening to reach the goal, but actually the goal is for the listening to happen, or the communication to happen as part of the process. If you listen only to content, try to focus on context, try to maybe listen to what people really are yearning for and what you understand, and check in to see if that's true. Maybe listening to the feelings. Don't do it all at once. Just try different things and be ready to fail. And the best thing that can happen is to notice and to start over again. That's the difference between good listening and bad listening, is noticing when it's not working and starting over again. So that's one tip. The second thing is notice what you need to be fully present, that you're not just in your head, that you're really in your whole body when you're listening. The more I do this, the more I realize that this makes a huge difference. Also in my trainings, every interaction that you have with someone impact us physically. There's emotions that show up, whether we like it or not, and there's many emotions, just to notice them. That will help with empathy, whether it's yours or the other person's. Noticing what's keeping your mind busy, if it is busy, and if it is, what is it, so that you can start working with it. And that in every interaction, there is something you can learn about that person that will help you work with them better in the future, always. And there's always something that's a gold nugget for yourself. Write it down, because it disappears quickly. So this listening scan is another tip that makes a huge difference in developing your muscle to listen in this powerful way. And before I give a last tip, Nicholas, what's the one thing that stuck out for you the most in what I've said in this conversation?
As in what you were saying within the 3 tips, or
no,
I
in
guess
general.
In general, well, I love writing and in general, being creative within, surrounding myself with creative people. So I think definitely what you said about letting your mind wander, but also talking about moments within memory, that was definitely stuck out to me, because I can definitely remember talking to someone who I haven't seen in a long time, and I remembered something that they said that they were thinking, how did you remember that? That was ridiculous. But that kind of memory really sticks, I think sticks with me over, I'm not sure what the other form of memory is, procedural or something, but that kind of memory sticks with me because, yeah, I think it's a kind of memory that activates when you have a kind of interest and think, wow, that's interesting about someone, which that kind of memory sticks in your mind. So that was the most interesting for me.
So I guess from that, a tip that comes up from that is, your relationships are long. If you think of the relationships in that conversation, not about just that moment, but about long term, you're going to listen differently. And if you think about moments that happen, multiple moments over a period of time, and this person, you're building relationships, you're building trust, and then you reconnect to what was important to them a long time ago, even to now, that's powerful. Also for listening. What about you, Susan? I'm just curious, maybe there's a 4th tip.
I love the idea of having the listening circle, and everybody knows when they are going to be speaking.
Yeah.
Because as you said, so often in meetings, it's dominated by 1 or 2 people. Other people get frustrated. There isn't the room for them to say, I make either make their contribution, or I've nothing to add. But that structure really, really helps.
Yeah. I think the thing is looking at the structures, and even in a one-to-one, hey, I have about 10 minutes, even if you have 15, give yourself a buffer. I have about 10 minutes. I'm here for you. What is it that you would like from me? Do you want me, what is it you need from me? How is it best that I help you? Or, I'd love to hear what you say, but I'd love for you to hear what I say too. So I'll listen to you for the first, 5 minutes. And if you listen to me after, so you can give those structures in there. It's okay. It works. And people are appreciative because it's clear. And they know where they are supposed to, where they're at, where they are, and their brains aren't trying to figure it out. Yeah.
So thanks ever so much for that. Before we go, can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah. Yes. So I had the privilege, I will show it here.
Woo!
Keynote Women. I'm a part of this community, which is, where I met you, Susan. Susan, it was really amazing community. And they put out a call and said, hey, who would like to be a part of writing a book? And I had thought about it for a long time. And I thought, okay, if I'm with a bunch of powerful women and there's a deadline, I know I can do something. And so in 2 months, we wrote this book, and it was for International Women's Day. It's called Incredible Women on How to Embrace Equity. And basically, we all took a chapter and wrote about our stories and relating to equity and how to look at equity in maybe ways that people had not thought of. And there's women from around the world, so a lot of different perspectives. And of course, I spoke about listening, but I shared stories that it was interesting. Writing this book, I went back in time when I first moved to Germany, and I was thinking about things I hadn't thought of for a long time. And I don't even think I realized at the time how much my listening impacted me at that moment, where moving to a country where you don't know the language and you have to figure things out. So I can't just listen to words. I've got to listen to everything else, the nuances, the facial expressions, where people's eyes light up, where they don't, in order to get things done. Checking out different perspectives, or even times where I was not listened to, and then how I felt, let's say, where I wasn't included. Well, let me give you an example. I had been a part of a project I worked in communications, and I had been a part of a project that was a really challenging project with issue management. And we had done a great job. And then I went on maternity leave. Like, I did the last big project right when I was fully pregnant. And then when I went on maternity leave, we ended up getting an award for this project, but I wasn't present. And people forgot to tell me, they don't see you. And so because I listen, I figured this out by chance. And so I went to my boss, and I'm like, hey, this happened. Nobody told me. And, that's not right. But she was so busy doing everything, because it was an intense project. She didn't realize that happened fully, a little bit, but not fully. Too busy to take care of things. Be careful with leaders who are too busy about this and acknowledgement. Anyway, luckily she didn't defend. She didn't try to fix things, she didn't defend. She did not make excuses. Instead, she listened and took it in, and then we worked with it. And actually, through that process where we were working together, we ended up finding solutions that really worked well, and helped me actually become a better communicator and get validation and acknowledgement that I didn't receive in that moment. So we were able to work through that, but that would not have happened if she hadn't listened to me. So there's a lot of different little stories like that there.
Oh, brilliant. And what I'll do is that I'll make sure that there's a link to that that book there for people to download and purchase. Nick, do you have anything else to add before we go?
No, I was just enthralled by your kind of storytelling taps into a kind of imagination. I love that analogy you said about the sunset, because I do love a good sunset myself, and yeah, you can take in the vastness and then appreciate the kind of moments, the final moments of the sunset. So yeah, it's great.
So, thank you for that, Nick. So before we go, Raquel, I would like to thank you, especially since you've had to get up so early to do this broadcast. There are so many takeaways, and I'm absolutely certain that people watching this, and also when it becomes a podcast, will really want to know more about you, and we will put information about how to contact you. The next session is going to be with Sam Horn on the 28th of June, and she has written Talking on Eggshells, and that's all about having difficult conversations. So it very much leads on from this. So Raquel, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It's just a pleasure to be here. It was really nice, and anybody who wants to get in contact, just reach out.
Absolutely, and we'll make sure that all of those contact details are available. So until next time, this is Susan Heaton-Wright and Nick Simon from SuperStar Communicator. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for listening to the Superstar Communicator podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to contact us at superstarcommunicator.com.